Apis Mellifera, or the Western Honeybee, has had a relationship with humankind for thousands of years. That is not to say that this relationship has not changed, for it most certainly has. Early beekeepers did not have access to the tools and techniques that developed during the Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries. Modern beekeepers have many advantages over their forerunners. Even so, beekeeping is equal parts art and science. Each hive has a unique personality, and a successful beekeeper must pay close attention to each colony's needs and act accordingly.
A person should not get into beekeeping on a whim. While many of us keep bees as a hobby, there's a level of commitment required that most hobbies do not demand. Beekeeping will lay claim to some of your time and money and will require education, dedication, and persistence if one is to succeed.
Depending on your personal circumstances, you may find that beekeeping is an excellent family activity. Many beekeepers include their spouses and children in their hobby. Generations of beekeepers, parents, children, and grandchildren can all get involved in various aspects of beekeeping, whether it is the actual tending of the bees, planting and caring for pollinator-friendly vegetation, extracting and processing honey, or even producing products from beeswax like candles, lotions, or lip balms. Bees are fascinating creatures. Their contribution to the food chain is indisputable, and their ability to work together to promote and ensure the success of the colony is impressive. Some beekeepers will set up a chair and watch their bees come and go for hours on end. Most people are aware that, like many wild animals, honeybees have been adversely impacted by climate change and humans' influence on the natural world. Transition to vast swaths of monoculture cropland and an increased reliance on herbicides and pesticides has affected bees in unexpected ways. In addition, much of their traditional habitat has been removed in response to the demands of human activities. Even if your family decides not to engage in your new hobby, who doesn't love pure, natural honey? A successful hobbyist beekeeper can expect to harvest anywhere from 30 to 80 pounds of honey from an established hive. This translates to 10 to 25 quarts of honey, which makes a great gift for friends and family members alike. Some beekeepers look at their new hobby as a way to supplement their income. Of all the reasons out there, this one is the worst. Unless you plan to grow your apiary to hundreds or thousands of hives, making money producing honey is highly unlikely. It may help to defray some of your costs, but making a profit by keeping a hive or two is not going to happen. Like any hobby, beekeeping begins with the purchase of the items you need to get started. The emphasis at this early stage is on the basics, what you need for the bees, as well as for the beekeeper. It all starts with somewhere to put your bees. There are several parts that comprise the hive. The foundation of the hive, like that of any building, is critical. If the foundation is not sound, your bee's new house could fall down. This foundation is called the hive stand. It can be an item manufactured for this very purpose, or something as simple as some cinder blocks to get the hive up off the ground. On this sturdy base, a hive bottom board will be placed. There are two basic choices, a solid bottom or a screened bottom. Both are acceptable and have their own advantages. Next comes a box in which to place the bees, called a deep. This describes the size of the box. Most beekeepers use one or more deeps to hold the bees' brood nest, or where the queen will lay eggs and the young will be nurtured and raised to adulthood. While the bees might be able to survive in an empty box, in order to keep it manageable for the beekeeper, we install frames for the bees to build out with honeycomb. Most beekeepers use frames that include foundation that the bees use as a guide to draw out the frames with wax to form the internal structure of the hive. Once the deep is filled with frames, an inner cover is installed to enclose the brood nest. This helps keep the bees warm and also serves to promote airflow through the hive to help the bees keep the hive at the appropriate temperature, whether during warm weather or cold. An outer cover, also called a telescoping cover, is placed above the inner cover. This serves to keep the rain and snow out of the hive. Lastly, an often overlooked yet critical hive component is a weight to keep things in place. Failure to weigh down the outer cover can result in losing the top of the hive in a stiff breeze. This can be a rock, a brick, or any other suitable weight close at hand. This gives you a basic hive that is ready for the introduction of bees. Over time, you will add additional deep boxes as the brood nest grows. Then you will add smaller boxes, either medium or shallow, along with the corresponding frames to give the bees somewhere to put excess honey. That is, the honey they make for the beekeeper. There are 3 tools that are critical for the new beekeeper: a hive tool, a smoker, and a bee brush. The hive tool is a catch-all that the beekeeper uses for many tasks, such as prying apart hive components, like the boxes and frames. Most people that are at all familiar with beekeeping are aware that beekeepers use smoke when working with their bees. Bees' primary method of communication is via pheromones, which they detect through their sense of smell. The introduction of smoke can overpower the pheromones and hence can keep any agitated bees from emitting the so-called alarm pheromone that will cause other bees in the hive to also become more aggressive. This calming influence allows the beekeeper to work her way through the hive without angering the bees. The third critical tool is the bee brush. This tool will not necessarily be used every time the beekeeper works with his bees, but at times it is indispensable. It can be used to brush the bees off hive components if they are in the way and preventing the beekeeper from performing their work. While the end goal of beekeeping is the production of honey, at least enough for the bees to overwinter, if not for the beekeeper, it may be necessary for the beekeeper to feed a hive, especially when a hive is first getting started, or in the autumn when the hive is preparing for winter. There are a variety of styles of feeders, though some work better than others in our area. As is the case in beekeeping in general, there is also a degree of personal preference in selection of the style of feeder to use. The food the bees require is simple: a sugar-water mixture or syrup to satisfy the bees' need for carbohydrates, energy, and a pollen substitute as a source of protein needed for raising their brood. Beekeepers also require special clothing. While we may try to be on the best terms possible with our bees, it is inevitable at some point that they will lose patience with us. As such, we need to take precautions to protect ourselves. Foremost in outfitting a beekeeper is the veil that covers your head. While stings on hands and arms are at the very least uncomfortable, stings on the face, especially near the eyes, can be excruciating. There are several styles of veils available, but what they share is the ability to keep bees away from the face while at the same time allowing the beekeeper to see what they are doing. To avoid being stung at all, it is advisable to wear long sleeves and long pants, as well as shoes that cover your toes. Sandals are fine for a day at the beach, but probably not your best choice for a day in your apiary. Lastly, many beekeepers wear gloves when working with their bees. There are many styles available, but the key to a good pair of gloves is one that protects the beekeeper from stings, while at the same time letting her feel what is in her grasp so as to avoid squishing any bees.
When all is said and done, you can expect to spend between $300 and $350 on the required hive components, both those that you need to get started, as well as the parts you need to have on hand as the hive grows. You can also expect to spend a fair amount on protective gear, though your choice of gear affects your cost. This could range from as little as $40 to as much as $250. When it comes to protective clothing, the key is to outfit yourself in a way that makes you comfortable, since a nervous beekeeper makes for nervous bees. One caution when buying used equipment: while it is possible to sterilize some hive components as well as protective clothing, frames with drawn comb cannot be. Many pathogens can be absorbed into beeswax, including diseases and pesticides, so if you're looking to cut corners to keep your entry costs down, the frames are not the place to do that. Buy new frames and foundation to ensure the health of your new colony. Lastly, you'll need to acquire bees. Unless you're lucky and have a friend that has too many bees and wants to give you some, money will be required for this part of your new hobby too. This can range from $120 to $200 depending on where you get your bees from.
One word of warning: no matter how careful you are and no matter how well you are outfitted in protective clothing, you will eventually be stung. The key to dealing with the inevitable sting is to first remove the stinger as quickly as possible and then to treat the sting location as needed to minimize discomfort. Never grasp a stinger with your thumb and forefinger. When a honeybee stings, her stinger and the attached venom sacs are left behind when the bee flies away. If you try to grab the stinger and pull it out, the act of doing so will squeeze all of the venom out of the venom sacs and into your body. Instead, use a fingernail, hive tool, or other object with a sharp, hard edge and scrape the stinger out of your skin. This will minimize the amount of venom injected into the wound, and if done quickly, can render a bee sting no more uncomfortable than a mosquito bite. It is also a good idea to keep an EpiPen handy, even if you are not allergic to stings. A friend, neighbor, or family member may have a reaction to a sting, and an EpiPen is a bit of insurance just in case. Most doctors will write a prescription for an EpiPen if you just tell them that you are a beekeeper. A key task for a responsible beekeeper is the periodic inspection of your hives. This is done to evaluate the progress of your colonies, as well as gauging if there are any actions required of the beekeeper, such as adding more boxes, treatment for various maladies, etc. Inspections are done on a schedule of no more frequently than 10 to 14 days. This is synchronized with the queen's life cycle and allows the beekeeper to get out in front of any issues that may arise with their queen. An inspection can be completed in 10 to 15 minutes, but it is imperative that the beekeeper moves slowly and deliberately to maximize her effectiveness and minimize any disruption to the bees. The larger the hive, the more time needed to perform an adequate inspection. In short, do not rush. If you have somewhere to be, don't try to squeeze in an inspection before you leave. The goal of any inspection is to evaluate the health of your hive. This includes finding evidence of the queen, which might include the queen herself, but eggs or open, uncapped brood also satisfies this goal. You will not see your queen on every inspection, so don't obsess over that. Also look for any signs of illness in the hive, including diseases or even parasites, such as Varroa mites, small hive beetles, or wax moths. A nice brood frame will include open or capped brood in the center of the frame, as well as food supplies, including pollen and possibly capped honey surrounding the brood. An essential resource in beekeeping is having a second opinion available when a problem in a hive is suspected. While YouTube has thousands of videos regarding beekeeping, keep in mind that what works in a warm climate in the central or southern U.S. will not work in northern Wisconsin. Talk to other beekeepers in your area and, if possible, have a mentor that you can turn to when you are in need of help. Don't be embarrassed to ask questions. Successful beekeepers are more worried about their bees' welfare than their own ego.
No matter how hard you try, you will lose hives. Beekeeping is equal parts art and science, and there is a lot to learn in order to get good at it. Just like in engineering, failure doesn't mean you should give up. Rather, learn from failure. If you did something wrong, losing a hive will be a painful reminder of that and will keep you from making the same mistake twice. Hives will sometimes die even when the beekeeper does everything right. Weather, environmental factors, and even bears can cause the demise of a hive. While you can take precautions for each of those, they may be beyond your ability to manage. So do your best, but understand that sometimes our best just isn't enough.
One of the largest challenges facing today's beekeeper is actually rather small, the aptly named Varroa Destructor, or Varroa mite. Like a common wood tick, Varroa mites attach themselves to the host honeybee. Unlike wood ticks, however, the mites feed on the bee's fatty tissues. The act of feeding on these tissues weakens the bee and impairs the bee's ability to deal with environmental toxins, but doesn't actually kill it. However, these mites are notorious carriers of viruses and bacteria that introduce a number of diseases into a bee colony. It is these germs that enter through the wound created by the mites that are the actual killers in the hive. Once a single bee becomes ill, being in close proximity to thousands of other bees guarantees that the disease will spread throughout the hive. A beekeeper's role in this is to monitor the mite population in the hive and employ a variety of synthetic or natural compounds or practices in keeping the mite population under control. No matter how careful you are, your bees will bring Varroa mites into the hive, so every beekeeper must take this threat seriously, or the entire honeybee population could be devastated. In fact, it is these mites that are the primary architect of the colony collapse disorder that was covered extensively in the mainstream media in the last several years. The last task of any beekeeper in our area before winter weather sets in is to make sure that her hives are as prepared as possible for the long Wisconsin winter. Wrapping the hives to limit drafts as well as controlling moisture are two of the most important preparations. It is also important to make sure that your bees have a sufficient supply of food to get them through the cold. The honey they made during the nectar flow supplies the energy needed for the bees to use their body heat to keep the cluster of bees warm in the cold, dark winter months.
By now, you're asking yourself, given the challenges facing you, is it worth it? The answer is a resounding yes. Beekeeping can be fun, can provide food for your family, and in general, the positive influence of honeybees on the environment cannot be overstated. Given the challenges facing bees today, getting into beekeeping can really help.
Okay, so this all sounds great to you, right? But you're asking, how do I get started? That's where the Chippewa-Eau Claire Beekeepers Association and Beaver Creek Reserve come in. Our two organizations have been educating beekeepers in northwestern Wisconsin for many years. For a modest fee, you can attend 3 classes throughout the year that will give you the information you need to become a successful beekeeper. In early March, we offer Beekeeping 101, so you want to be a beekeeper. In early May, we offer Beekeeping 102, I have bees, now what? And in early August, we offer Beekeeping 103, Harvesting and Winterizing Your Apiary. Each of these classes are put on at Beaver Creek Reserve and are a full-day class on the first Saturday of their respective month. If you are already a member of Beaver Creek Reserve, you will receive a small discount, but even non-members are welcome to join us. Much has been made of the plight of the honeybee in the 21st century. Why not do your part to contribute to your local environment and join the ranks of Wisconsin beekeepers? It is a rewarding hobby and will help you and your neighbors' gardens to thrive.